Thank you for listening in to another episode of Conversations with Alison Jaye, The Journey to Here. Please remember to subscribe, hit the like button and share.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Conversations with Alison Jaye, The Journey to Here. I'm your host, Alison Jaye. Today, I'm so pleased to welcome our guest, Damon Brown. Damon helps side hustlers, solopreneurs and other non-traditional creatives bloom. As a best-selling author, 2-time startup founder, and 3-time TED speaker, Damon co-founded the popular platonic connection app Cuddlr and led to its acquisition within a year, all while being the primary caretaker of his infant son. Damon now guides others through his one-on-one coaching, public speaking on platforms like TED Talk. He's a contributor to many publications as a columnist. He also teaches speech writing at the premier performing school, Heroic Public Speaking. Damon's latest book is Bring Your Worth, Level Up Your Creative Power and Value and Service in the World. The follow-up to his bestseller, The Ultimate Bite-Sized Entrepreneurial, 76 Ways to Boost Time, Focus and Productivity on Your Big Idea. He was the first entrepreneur in residence at the Toledo Library. Join his community at joindamon.me. Damon, thank you so much for joining us here on Conversations with Alison Jaye, The Journey to Here. Because I can't draw to save my life. If my life depended on it, it's like, that's it, forget it, done. And but I've always appreciated arts and the fact that those people that can draw, and also music, I would say is my absolute first love. But I sing a little bit. That's best left to just like the confines of my four walls though, and I play no instrument. So again, those that can and do absolutely admire and respect it. And it's only of recent, I'd say the last just over a year, that I've actually considered myself an artist. It's because somebody said to me, I was at church and this woman, she was like, are you creative? And at first I was going to say no, but something within me said, no, say yes. And I just thought, well, the fact that you write, you have books published, and I think that would say you had some creativity going on.
Little something, yeah. And a lot of the work that I do as a business coach, it's talking to people who, for a long time, didn't identify with being creative. There's an author and a creator named Chase Jarvis, and he and I are cool, but he's on a whole different level, where he has this startup called Creative Live. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it allows you to watch thousands of hours worth of programming for free. And it's experts on a particular thing. So it's an expert on money matters when it comes to the creative arts. There's an expert on procrastination and so forth. And he designed it. He did it with his co-founder, amazing stuff. What he talks about is how when we're at a certain age, we get lumped to the creative and the non-creative, as if it's like you having brown hair versus me having black hair. Like it's like a separation, it's an identity there. It ends up being from there. But that actually drives the point where, again, my eldest is 7, and around that time, then you start to get the messages of, you're an artist, or you're creative, or you're good with numbers, you're going to be an accountant, and family members or even strangers on the street, when they see talent in someone, then I think they mean well, but then that also starts to close other doors. And I'm really interested in people doubling down once they figure out what that is, but that has to come from inside versus society saying you have to be this.
Because you're good at something doesn't mean that it's your passion though.
Yeah, I had there was something going on with my dad's side of the family. We might have been at a funeral or something like that. It was some type of gathering. It was rather somber. And we're trying to get everything organized for whatever was happening. And it was quite a while ago. It was probably late teens, early 20s. And I remember one of my uncles was like, yeah, and then Damon can handle numbers because he's good with numbers. And I'm fine with numbers, but that's, if you look at my long resume, none of it has to do with numbers. But for him, he was like, oh yeah, you wear glasses. You have your master's. You're good with numbers. Right. You have the highest degree of anyone here at that time, because I have brothers that have PhDs now. By the time I had the highest degree, and they're like, oh yeah, Damon's smart. Give him the numbers. And I'm like, I'm not an accountant. I've never wanted to be an accountant. I'm fine with numbers, but it's not my thing. So even as we grow up, again, I was a grown adult. So even as we grow up, we have that pressure, which kind of gets into our conversation anyway, as far as with specifically Black men, but just in general, this measuring the societal pressure. It's almost like physics, the societal pressure versus what you are actually supposed to be, the acorn that you're growing from, and we continue to grow from, even after we become adults. And more so than, I can speak for America, more so than almost any other culture, we have that outside pressure. I have immigrants in my family, and so that's a whole different type of pressure. As far as the South Asian immigrants I have in my family, they have different societal pressure, but that comes from within the family. For the average Black man in America, the pressure comes from outside. And so it's a different conversations, but it's definitely a unique kind of pressure that we face. Yeah.
It's interesting that you should say that, because when you're talking, because I haven't been in the US that long, and
okay.
I'm trying to think, my age group, I actually don't have any relatives that have been born in the US. They've either come straight from Jamaica, where my parents are originally from, or from London, where I'm originally from. Mm-hmm. So I don't actually, but they're having children, but born here in the US. So it's interesting for you to say that, because I'm on this journey thinking, I'm not one of these people that I live here in the US and I'm just bringing what I'm bringing. No, I want to learn, because I don't know, I could be here for another however many years, or I could go home back to London next week. We just don't know what the future holds for any of us, right? So it's interesting that you should say that, because when I think about other cultures, and you say that you're South Asian, the pressure comes from within the family. And then I'm looking at, if I look at the Caribbean, where my family are from, is the pressure from within the family? Not really. Again, it's external pressures to be something. But then when I look at my friends from African countries, a lot of the pressure is from within the family, because you have to either be a doctor, a lawyer, or I don't know if there's any other occupation outside of that, right?
That's engineer actually would be the third one for my Asian in-laws and relatives. Like that's the trifecta, and then there's everything else.
But in African families, there is nothing else. It's like
right, and maybe I'm being kind here. That might be the case for them too. But yeah, I hear you.
so it's
fair enough.
Yeah, it's very interesting that because I did a podcast recently with a young lady. I believe her family's originally from Nigeria, and we would talk. The topic was colorism. And it's amazing how us as Black people, we categorize each other, but everybody else looking at us is like, no, you're just all Black.
Right.
So I say that to say, but then when you dig deeper, there are such fundamental differences between if you are Black English, African American, African, or there are such distinct and vast differences.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Us, such a rich, diverse people within a people, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. It does. Some of my closest friends are from the various islands. So from Grenada, from Jamaica, from Dominican Republic. And it's interesting when we all hang out, and all men, so we'll all hang out, the ones that are from the islands, all men, and we'll all hang out, and there'll be certain things that are unique to our various cultures. I was born in New Jersey, so it's a little bit different. But then there's certain things, I will say something, and then every other person will understand. Not because we're friends, but because there is that unique cultural heritage. I spent some time living in New Orleans, and that's almost like that was like a precursor to the friends that I ended up making later in the San Francisco area when I lived up there, where it was just like, okay, everyone's different. Everyone's all over the place. You know, everyone's a different color. Talk about a Benetton ad, just like so many different types of cultures and foods and spices. And everyone still respects their individual heritage, but there's still something. By the time I lived there, I became a New Orleaner. But that's that foundation that all of us, you know, came from, that all of us represented, even though we had the Creoles over here, and we had the Cajuns over here, and, you know, we had different various people, the West Indians over here. Later on, the Mexican culture, Latina culture came in after Hurricane Katrina. So it's like all this stuff is coming in, but at the base, it's all the same, which I think is kind of the beauty of America, where, you know, no matter, I've done quite a bit of world traveling, I want to do a whole lot more. And no matter where I go, I'm going to be an American. Mm-hmm. Now, the different layers of that, which we can talk about for hours, I can get to my family tree and all that stuff. But, you know, at that base, I'm an American. And it doesn't make more weight or less weight. It's just fact. Yeah. I'm from Atlantic City. I could live overseas for the rest of my life. It doesn't matter. Yeah, you know, and so, right? You're always going to be from London, right?
Always going to be English. I'm just
exactly. Yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah, you know, and I can't escape it. The minute I open my mouth, it's like, oh yeah, I forgot.
I'm sure, especially here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Less so in other countries, but especially here.
And not only that, being a Black English woman, because many people have not met or heard. And they just think, oh my God.
That's shocking to me. But I've traveled a lot, so that's, you know, that's kind of the norm. And not deviates too much, but there's one little aspect where my wife is Hindi. And so she was born in India and then came over here. She's zero generation. So she came over here when she was very young. So raised here in the States, but originally from there. Mm-hmm. And we did our first overseas travel together several years ago. And one place we went was Paris. Absolutely love Paris, loved it then, love it now. And we just like to get lost and walk around. And we were walking around Paris. We don't know French, so we know like 5 words in French. So we're walking around and it smells like now my mother-in-law. It smells like my mother-in-law's kitchen. And then we see at the corner, it's a roti place. But not your roti, but my wife's roti. So more the Indian roti, you know, and it's like, right? And what's that?
They call it chapati.
I think it depends on the part of India. She's from northern India. So there's like, it's the same exact thing, but there's 20 names for it. So, you know, you're probably right as well. And there's also a million different types of breads, which again is a whole different conversation. But they specifically were making roti over there, the roti that I know of from Hindi culture, from northern India. And it was amazing when we smelled it. And of course, she stopped because she cooks as well. She's like, what's going on? And then they're speaking French. And it was just this like, they're speaking French. And I think they're also speaking Hindi. So ended up being that blend over here where you call it Spanglish, as far as Spanish and English. They were doing their version of that.
Right.
Just like in my household, we use English and we use a little bit of Hindi, but that's because those are the different languages. And then I know a tiny bit of Japanese. My wife, as well as my mom, knows Spanish, and we've been to Italy. So all these little words are all intermingling. But you have that first cognitive dissonance, you know, when you go someplace new, which is probably why I love travel, where it's like you go there and suddenly you're like, oh, not all Black people speak English. Wake up. Right? That simple thought, just, you know, it can turn you upside down if you've never been exposed to that type of thing.
That is very true. And I must admit, I have, because I have traveled, thankfully, extensively myself. And one of my goals is to visit every state in the US.
Oh, you should.
Yeah, I'm on a mission for that one. But it's very amazing when, and for example, to your point, I remember many years ago when I wanted to be a teacher. I don't know what possessed me, but I wanted to be a teacher. And I met this little girl, and her family's from India. She had the thickest Scottish accent I've ever heard in my entire life. It was actually the most adorable, cutest thing. And because I was a teenager then as well,
Right.
and then I think, and also before that, having been to Jamaica when I was in my early teens, and I heard a Chinese person speak again, thickest Jamaican.
With the patois, yeah.
Yes, I was reaching for something in the supermarket. She was telling me, don't take that from there. And seeing a white woman like with speaking patois and everything. So I learned from an early age that it's, just you've got people from every ethnicity everywhere.
Yes.
But anyway, we digress. But what I wanted, some of the things I wanted to speak to you about, I was introduced to you because of an article I read about Black fathers needing therapy and not getting it. Now, one of the things that I realized many, many years ago, I would say almost 20 years ago now, is the disproportionate numbers of Black men in mental health facilities. Considering the number of the population that we make up and this was in the UK, so in the UK and here in the US, the numbers of young Black men in these facilities was very alarming to me. And for many years, I did nothing with it until I got involved with a very dear friend of mine, and also my godmother. She works in the mental health field. So I started to look into things more. And because I just wanted to think, and then having family members, because I'm not ashamed or embarrassed to say, yes, I have family members that have suffered with mental health challenges. Mm-hmm. And I've just been wanting to look at to see what is the disconnect there. So when I read articles like yours that says Black fathers need therapy, but they're not getting it. And then they went on to read that you, for a period of time, were a father with sole custody raising your infant child. It's like, what does that do to a man? Especially if we go back to what we were talking about, the external pressure from society, because if everybody if we all actually listen to the media, we would think that there are no Black fathers in the home and there are no Black men raising their children. I mean, just let's
period, point blanket, end of story.
All Black men are doing is they're just baby making machines, and then they just leave and move on to the next one. When the reality is, and I can speak from first-hand experience because my relatives are all, there's many Black men that I am actually related to, and they are great husbands. They are great fathers. So what led you to write that article? And then I want to kind of get into the rest of your journey and your businesses and your mentoring and coaching.
Thank you. Yeah. Number one, I'm glad the article touched you. It was kind of a marker in time where I wanted to talk about it, where I wasn't the only one raising our first son. Now we have two, but I was, as you heard, but I wasn't raising him on my own. I was thankfully happily married, with my wife of several years now. So we were in a privileged position to be able to do literally family planning. Mm-hmm. So really fortunate with that, particularly for people in my culture. It was like, all right, we want to have kids. This is how we're going to have kids. And it worked out that way. What I will say, though, is the article actually stemmed from 7 years ago when my wife went back to work. She had a nice paternity leave. So she went back to work. And then I was at home with my son. He was 4 months old. And if you look at Mr. Mom or, Three Guys and a Baby or whatever, like the classic movies, I'm sure they're awful, but the classic movies from the 80s that I grew up with, imagine the African-American version of that. So I didn't know what the heck I was doing, even though I knew I always wanted to be a father. And as I mentioned in the Fatherly article, it's fatherly.com, I had complicated relationships with my dads. I have a biological dad and I have a stepdad who raised me. Complicated relationship with both of them. And so I knew I wanted to be there for them. The article came about, though, from that period of time, believe it or not, so 7 years in the making, where there was a tremendous amount of pushback for me being the primary caretaker. And we can get into this as far as my business, but I became an entrepreneur at the exact same time that I became a stay-at-home dad. And so my son would wake up exactly at 6 a.m. on the dot. My wife would go to work at 7 a.m. and then she'd be back home and settled by 6 p.m. So for 11 to 12 hours, it was just me and little guy. The startups I started, the second of which became pretty successful, they were done from 3:15 in the morning to 6 a.m. So I could actually spend the day with my son.
Right.
And I recently did a keynote where I talked about the idea of big rocks, where it's a theory that Stephen Covey has. He passed away a few years ago. But as far as putting in your big rocks in the jar and then putting your small pebbles in, and everything fits, right? He was my big rock, still is. Now both of them are, both of my kids. And so with that in mind, from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., it was me and him's time. And we lived in San Diego at the time. So we'd like go outside. I'd connect with other stay-at-home fathers and who were all white, by the way. So there weren't other, even people of color, not even that, just everyone was white, who I was cool with, and I'm still cool with them. And all our sons, we all had sons, we're all around the same age. We all had that same friction as far as Chris Rock says, and I'm going to paraphrase him, but his delivery is perfect. He says, great, you had a child, you're taking care of your kid. What do you want, a cookie?
Yeah.
It's like, right? So I love that skit. But basically what he's saying is like, it's possible from both sides, from being an African-American male who helps or particularly takes the lead on raising their child or children with their partner, or maybe without their partner, and us expecting to get kudos for that. Or being in the other boat where, in my case, where this is what I'm supposed to do. And the amount of looks and the amount of conversations that happened where I would take my son to music class. It was a little music class, for toddlers at the time. I think he just turned 1. Started taking a music class. In fact, it was before that. So he was a baby. And, everyone else is a woman, and it's like, and luckily I have a flexible schedule. So, but whatever, it is what it is. And the amount of pushback where it's like, oh, is it daddy day? Oh, daddy's gonna take care of it until mommy gets ready. Like all this dialogue. And I'm like, no, like mommy's at work. Daddy was working at 3 a.m. this morning. So this is father and son time. And this will be father and son time tomorrow and the day after that. And the day after that. Exactly.
The days, weeks, and months after. Exactly,
right. Suddenly I get my New Jersey attitude where I'm like, yeah, and what? Right? Suddenly you get East Coast on them. It's like, what are you talking about? My very long explanation of saying that Black fathers who are active, I don't mean Black fathers in general, I mean Black fathers with a capital F. They're involved with their kids every day. They're not just bringing home the money and then moving on to something else, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm talking about a particular type of active father. Hands-on, whatever term you want to use. We're either not getting any credit, so we're invisible, or the pendulum's on the other side where we're given so much credit that it's patronizing. Where it's just like, oh, of course, this is my son as much as it's my wife's son. Of course we're spending time together. And a lot of the dialogue has been chastising us as a culture for the Black men that haven't been involved in their family. But then when you see it, it's like, there's that pressure with that. Add in the recent death of George Floyd. I think it's been just over 2 months, which is crazy. It feels like it's been years. But it's been 2 months since his death, with Breonna, with Aubrey, like that trifecta of people of African descent who were killed at the hands of police, and the uprisings that started, almost exactly 2 months ago. And suddenly it's like, all right, so it's not just a matter of either getting too much credit or not enough credit as far as being African American and male and taking care of our kids, but there's also that higher level of now we need to protect our kids.
Yeah.
And I'm having, as you read in the Fatherly article, I'm having to have the same conversation with my 7-year-old that my stepfather who raised me, had to have with me around the same age. You know, as far as if you see a cop, this, that, and the third, not everyone's going to be your friend. I know they're wearing a particular uniform and that's considered safety, but not everyone has your best interest in mind. All these kind of coded words to basically say, to some people, you're going to be considered a threat, even though, you know, you can barely pee straight. You know what I mean? It's like,
you know, as you say that, it's not just, I'm finding now, and I don't have any sons, I have bonus sons, but I
gotcha.
don't, and so it's.
I love that term. I might steal that. Yeah, I like that.
You know, I got it from Jada Pinkett Smith. That's
oh, nice. Makes perfect sense. I can see that with their dynamic. Yeah, I got it. I can see that.
And I'm like, I like it, stealing it, it's mine.
Indeed.
So and so for me, it's a case of, okay, their father and mother, but I kind of, you know, do help to reinforce that. But it's not just the police that we are having to have these conversations with our sons about anymore, is it? I mean, if we look at that, and in one respect, I hate that it happened, but in another respect, I'm so glad that it happened. Amy Cooper, Central Park.
Oh yeah. We can talk about that.
Because I've actually written an article, and I pray that it goes absolutely viral, and not just for self-promotion. It's called The Gaslighting of Black People. Because if you think about that, we have been saying things like this have been happening for years, decades.
Centuries.
Right. Oh no, don't be silly. And it's like we're being made to question our perception and our experiences of things. Hence why I call it gaslighting, because that's exactly what gaslighting is, right? So the fact that that happened, so you can see that this man was 120% in the right by asking this woman to follow the rules. And rather than follow the rules, the way that she went, listen, she went in. An African-American man is threatening my life. I'm calling. It's like, wow, like, it's like, all of that, sweetheart? All of that? Like, really? For real? Like, for real? And it was just like, wow, that was, and then all the other ones that came, the guy in San Francisco where the woman said that, I know the people that live here personally, and it was the man's own house. The extent that will be gone to promote their sense of, I don't even know what to call it, but promote their sense of something. So we're now having to talk to our children that you might even feel that you want to go and help somebody, but you still need to be careful in your helping somebody. You could just be walking down the street and the person feels threatened by you. And I mean, to be honest, it's just like, how threatened do you really feel? Personally, I don't get it, but how, you know? So there's all these different conversations now about having to have with your sons. I mean, what do you think about having to have those kinds of conversations now?
I think they're all the same conversation. And I've lived all across the country. So originally from the East Coast, had my teenage years in the Midwest. As I mentioned, lived in New Orleans for a spell, lived up and down the California coast, lived in Midwest again, and then just recently moved to Las Vegas. And, you know, you combine that with like the world culture, and obviously my wife's from a different continent, and she's just as traveled, maybe even more so. And so we do bring that atmosphere where you have to know, as my friends might say, you have to know how to move. You have to know how to move in different circles. So if I'm on the rough streets of New Jersey, which is where both my parents are from, then I'm going to hold myself differently than if I'm, you know, at a Fisherman's Wharf up in San Francisco where I used to live. Like it's going to be different, and it's going to be, yeah. I mean, and this goes to. It's interesting that I became a coach the same time I became a dad, because I think there's kind of that the overlap there. Not as far as a patronizing standpoint, but more like learning to take the stuff that I've learned and the stuff that I've gotten from other people, game, as people would say now, taking all that game and then codifying it, putting into a mindset so that you can use it anywhere. And that's what I'm trying to do with my kids, where it's just like, all right, you know, in Japan, I'm very fond of Japan. So it's like in Japan, like they slurp their food because the food's so hot, but then they don't blow their nose when they're out on the sidewalk because that's considered rude. Mm-hmm. Where we're the opposite.
Right, yeah.
My son learned that when he was like 2, you know, when he was looking at the pictures of me in Japan back when I was in my 20s. So that's what I'm trying to say, is that I think it's less for me as far as being a father and being a primary caretaker. It's less about I need to tell them how to handle themselves in all these situations. It's more like trying to give them like a foundation or a framework. Because frankly, I can't prepare them for everything. And every day I work hard to make peace with that. Because if I was a parent, I felt like I had to prepare them for every single thing they're going to go up against. Number one, I don't know that. You know, I don't know everything they're going to deal with. And number two, they'll be ego driven of me to think I can protect them that far. Right. What I can do is teach them how to fish. You know, so that's the focus, where it's like, okay, every morning we watch TED Talks. You know, it's like, we'll literally watch TED Talks. And it's like, all right, this is giving a framework. So you end up in these situations, then maybe that'll boost your emotional intelligence more than perhaps the person that has less emotional intelligence who's trying to trigger you. So that's my main focus, is less situational, more intuitive. I want them to get to the point where they get into a situation and they know. You know, and I think traveling, I think being exposed to different cultures, being honest with them. I try to be really honest with them. And then, again, giving them ideally the tool set they need to, again, as I'm a big Jay-Z fan. And one of the things he said is, I feel comfortable in every room. And I'm like, that's why I like your work. You know, and I try to do the same, where it's like, if I'm, again, speaking on the TED stage, or, you know, if I'm speaking to somebody in the corner, it's like, we can talk about whatever. I want to give them those tools. I want to give them that. Because I know I meet people who don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
And I know that their parents either didn't have the tools to give them, or provide them with something else, but not that, or they haven't been exposed enough to be comfortable in every room.
And I think that is...
Am I making sense? You hear what I'm saying, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think it's the latter, because I didn't know that Jay-Z had actually said that. But one thing I've actually said for many, many years is that I like to believe that I can operate in everybody's world.
I like that.
Because, again, my parents are, like I mentioned, my parents are from Jamaica, so I could go into a Jamaican supermarket and know how to behave. I can go into the corporate world and know how to behave. I can go into the nightclub, know how to behave, and I can walk into a church and know how to behave, because I'm a minister now, but I spent many years in the nightclub. Expect you, but you know, but
that makes the best ministers. Are you kidding?
I haven't forgotten where.
Right. Oh, of course. Right.
Yeah, so
it makes perfect sense. Yeah.
To adapt yourself to that. So absolutely, I 100% agree with that, and I actually do try to live by that, being able to operate. Because there's many people I've come across, and I've realized I can function in your world, you can't function in mine. And it's not as a bad thing. It's because it's a realization that they've never come to, because they've never had to.
There it is, right there. And I mean, in America, we have that term code switching, which you might have heard of, right? Right. So you're familiar with that. So the idea of using a different language or vernacular, depending on who's listening. I think as you get older and as you set up more roots, and maybe as you establish credibility, I don't have to code switch as much as I used to. Right. But I also know what language to use. And so there's kind of this blend of being more myself, but that's because I've earned that credibility over time and knowing how to function in different rooms. But that's something that is unique to the multicultural experience. Again, I'm African-American, my wife is Hindi. Our experiences as a guy from, South Jersey and a woman from Northern India, raised in California, it's like different.
Mm.
But the amount of things and dynamics that our sons are getting exposed to, and our cultural differences, our language differences, certain jokes or ways, afflects that I have with my mom, who I'm really close to, they hear that. And in a certain language, literally 2 or 3 other languages that my wife uses with her mom, my mother-in-law, like they hear that. And it's like, okay, so they're already code switching, and not in a negative way.
Mm.
Just like they're already learning how to maneuver. When we're in Jersey getting cheesesteaks, that's going to be a different culture.
Yeah.
They were on the West Coast, eating the roti and eating chicken tikka masala. Like, it's just going to be a different vibe.
Mm-hmm.
That's the beauty. And I see that within my family. But in a broader sense, for a lot of us of African heritage or of other heritage who have come here, we do that by nature. We do that naturally. Because at least in America, I can't speak for the UK because I don't know the makeup there, but at least here in America, we are not the majority as far as being monolithically, we're not the majority. As a diverse culture, we're a majority, but monolithically, like African Americans are not the majority.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's, you hear what I'm saying? Oh, okay, same in the UK. So you know what I'm saying? So then as soon as I went to school, I had to be cross-cultural. That might be the better word than code switching. Yeah. I had to be cross-cultural. Mm-hmm. I got my master's from Northwestern. I think for my class, I was the only Black guy there. Mm-hmm. For that year, there was literally one other Black guy getting the master's. And obviously we knew each other. Yeah, right. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so obviously, you know that route. Like, I know And so that's now our advantage, because there are literally millions of people who have never had to do that. Mm-hmm. And it's, again, not just like you said, not to chastise them, just we as a people need to understand our advantage of that. Mm-hmm. It's nothing to be ashamed of, or it's like, oh, it needs to change. No, that's a strength. That's a strength.
And the funny thing for me is, I digress a little bit, I absolutely really love it. And it's when you walk into a room and you make the assumption that the people in the room are not going to understand what you're saying if you're walking in on the phone talking to somebody else. And like so, for example, my parents are Jamaican, so I'm talking on the phone, speaking Cuddlr and all the rest of it.
Yeah, you're going in.
And then somebody in the room says, because my husband is, I'm like, oops. That's like, oh, okay. So I absolutely love it, and there are those times when I actually really like when I'm being busted, because when I'm in the UK, I'll be speaking Cockney and whatever. Mm-hmm. When I'm around my Jamaican family, it's another dialect. When I'm here in the UK or in the corporate world, it's a completely different one again. So I really like it, and I do like when I get busted because somebody's understood me. and not only that, it's an icebreaker.
Absolutely.
Because then you find that somebody that you possibly just by looking at them wouldn't have thought you could have anything to identify with them. And then you now have this common thing that you can speak to and discuss. So I really do, I do love it. But the question I wanted to ask you is, you had mentioned when you were taking your son to his music lessons, and people are like, oh, so it's Daddy's Day and things like that. And one of the things that I'm curious about, as an African-American man, did you ever get the sense that people were thinking that you were the kind of deadbeat dad and you weren't working or earning and it was just your wife?
Oh, wow. In all these years, I've never thought about that. And I've done my share of writing. I've written like 6 books in the last 7 years. That never crossed my mind. Darn good question. I'm going to say no, just because of we were in a fairly nice neighborhood in San Diego. So we were privileged to have a place there, and so that wasn't really part of the conversation. And the second half of fatherhood, we lived in Ohio, and that's when we lived in the Midwest up until the past year. And by then, I had enough credibility, and I put that in air quotes, credibility, because by then I already had my coaching practice. I already did 2 TED Talks and so forth. So I think that was, frankly, a bullet I was able to avoid. I didn't get that sense. And I got 2 degrees in journalism. I communicate a lot. So I'm really sensitive to the words people say and what they don't say. So I'm really sensitive to that. I never picked up on that from people. But that's a really good question. I think, and I break down the neighborhoods because I think that's why I avoided it.
Right.
Because if I had been, I don't know, in South Central, you know, and I have some relatives in that area, in South Central LA, then it might have been different. You know, if I was in the Treme down in New Orleans, which I lived right outside of the Treme, when I lived down there, then the conversation might have been different. So I think it really depends on that. If I lived in, pardon my French, like a lily white part of Orange County, then I'm positive. I lived in Orange County for a couple of years. It might have been, in fact, I know it would have been a different conversation. So I think part of it was luck. But that's a phenomenal question. Like, it's a really good point, especially if you're coming from the world of, I would be labeled a creative, you know, again, whether that's fair or not, doesn't matter, but I'm labeled a creative. And so if you're working from home, if you're sitting there thinking, and then you're thinking some more, and you think some more, and suddenly you come out with a book like a year later, like that's not necessarily considered productivity. That's starting to shift now. Hopefully I'm part of that. But it's easy to assume that that's more like the lost college student, you know, or that kind of analogy, or the creative loafing or whatever, versus actually being part of the productivity.
Right.
I mean, you said you've written a couple books. You understand where that just takes time,
yeah.
and that takes thought. You shouldn't just churn out books. And so that takes time to develop that. Now, I have talked to family on all sides of my family about what I do. There's some family members that still don't understand what I do. I was on the cover of the Wall Street Journal. They still don't get what I do. Like, and there's always going to be that gap. And so that goes back to the outer pressure and the inner pressure. That part of the discussion is more the inner pressure versus the outer pressure. Does that answer your question?
It does. And because the reason that I ask is because I know people that have happened to, and they picked up on that. And I've heard those conversations as well. Like,
oof, that's tough.
Yeah. And it's like, I wonder if he's not working, you know, deadbeat dad because he doesn't want to, and he's lazy and things. So I've heard, yes. So
that has to hurt. That has to hurt.
And I was looking at it thinking, okay, I'm going to remove myself because I don't really know the people that they're speaking of, and I'm not going to make that assumption. And I actually think it was really, I thought it was just I can't find a strong enough word, but it was just so disheartening and mean that they were actually having this conversation, because you could tell it was purely speculation. They didn't really know the circumstances of this couple. They just knew that he, as a Black man, an African-American man, was at home while she was working. So I just wanted to know if you had ever come across that.
I'm curious, just to dig deeper, was it cases where the couple was multiracial?
One was, yes.
Okay, because I'm wondering if that's part of the dynamic, which whole different conversation. But yeah, I'm curious about that part as well.
One was, yes.
Yeah. I have to say, like, I've been listening to your podcast, and the one where is her name Baz? I want to make sure I don't.
Yes.
Okay, right. And but listening to that conversation with her and about the so-called justice system, and more specifically the prison system. I ended up watching 13th recently.
So
it had been on my list. I'm a huge Ava DuVernay fan, like big fan, like total fanboy. And that was one of the movies I hadn't seen. And I realized why I hadn't seen it yet, because it was hard, really hard movie to watch. But it was interesting talking, or at least listening to you two talk, you and Baz, who's in the film, and then watching the film shortly after. And the way they described it, I think Baz might have described it this way too, where with the epidemic, particularly with crack in the 80s, and, you know, I was part of that generation. I was a kid then. And again, my folks are from the inner city over in Jersey, so I saw some of that. And because of the really tough laws, whole swaths, I wish I could remember the analogy they used, but just it bulldozed through our communities and took away all these Black men. But then there's being the criticism as far as the fathers not being around. And it's like, but the system was set up so that Black and brown, like Latinos too, were taken out of the community. And they're doing sentences forever based on having, you know, a small bag of marijuana, which of course, I know Silicon Valley now, there's billion-dollar startups based around it, but that's a whole different discussion 30 years later. But that feeds back to the fatherly piece I did, where it's just like, okay, well, the system's setting us up for failure, but then we're being blamed for the failure. Mm-hmm. And there's accountability that we have. Yeah. Again, I have a father and a stepfather, so I know the deal. Mm-hmm. There's accountability there. But there also is, again, the inside versus the outside. And I think as a culture, we're really trying to meet it at least halfway, or maybe even going beyond. But there's also a system in place from the outside. And it could be like the penal system, or specifically the justice system, to go broader, I mean, where the justice system is basically saying, okay, well, if you end up making a mistake when you're 15, you'll be tried as this, and then you won't be able to get a job for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. So you can have kids, but you won't have a way to provide for them. So good luck. Yeah. You know, and then there's psychological stuff, which is what I was really talking about in the fatherly piece, where it's like, then there's the microaggressions, then there's the being counted out or not counted in. There's the lack of access to services when a certain people do find stress. And then because there isn't a proper pipeline, which could get into the STEM idea, but because there isn't a proper pipeline for people of color to become psychotherapists or psychologists, or even like counselors, you know, on a more basic level, or advisors, because that pipeline's screwed up because of the other stuff going on, mm-hmm. then we're not going to see someone across from the table that we identify with. And as I talk about in the piece, I was lucky where my first therapist looked literally like my pop. Wow. Same age, everything. And I was like, okay. And so I could say whatever I had to say. And number one, from a cultural standpoint, he knew the deal. If I was saying this, he knew what I really meant. So that's one. Again, back to my circle of friends, like there's a certain Black male specifically, but Black in general, but Black male vernacular where I can text something to any of my friends of African-American descent or African descent even, if you're going to broaden it to that, who are raised in America, I can say something to them and they were like, oh, okay. And they'll totally get it. They'll get again, I'm a language guy. They get the language. So he had that. There was also a level of comfort because he understood the issues of the outside pressure. Mm. And then because he understood the culture, he also understood the inside pressure. You know, growing up, and definitely for previous generations, it's like Black people don't go to therapy.
Because of
right? We don't. And now, I don't know about the UK, but here.
It's not just here in the US, honestly.
Really? I'm sorry to hear that. Okay.
And the thing is, I think a lot of it in the UK as well comes from, again, the majority of us, my age group, because I'm in my late 40s. So mm-hmm. the majority of us and I'd say from probably about, say, 45 to maybe 65, you'll find the majority, I'd go as far as saying, look, 98% of people of color in the UK in that age group are all first generation British. I don't know anyone my age, and I know a lot of people, I don't know anyone my age in the UK whose parents were born in the UK. All first generation British from either the islands, Africa, and so on. Being raised in the church, so I know a lot of people there. And then having spent many years in the clubs and ended up working with a lot of these DJs and nightclub owners, I ended up meeting a lot of people there. Every single person I know is first generation British. Every single person. So it is the same. And then, you know, culturally, that's where it comes from as well. Because, you know, you're not, I mean, 20, 30, 40 years ago, you're not going to find a man in Africa going to therapy. You're just not. You're just not.
Right. And I've talked to my friends. Well. I was about to say, I talked to my friends, again, from various parts of the Caribbean and beyond. And all the guys I know from the islands, they're like, no. But we're having, and I mentioned that very briefly in the piece, and some of the new pieces I have coming out now, is that now we're all also like you in our 40s. So for a lot of them, I started having therapy or had my first therapist when I was 19. For a lot of them, they're starting that journey now. Early, mid, late 40s. They're just talking to a therapist now, and they're like, oh, it's like, oh, that's what it's about. And it's like, yeah, nobody's gonna, put you in an asylum or anything like that. It's just like, no, it's just, you need someone to talk to. And what we end up doing often, and I found this in other cultures as well, particularly like minority cultures or even immigrant cultures, what we end up doing is saying, well, the gym is my therapy. Cooking is my therapy. No, I'm going to go and,
I'm going to go for a run. I'm going to go work out.
Oh, right. Which I do all those things, but it's like, and you need to go to a therapist.
Exactly.
You can't, you can't. And I love to meditate. I meditate every day, but you can't like meditate your way through a therapy session. Like you can't do it alone. And another thing that I talked about in the piece was that it comes from an outside issue that became an inner issue, as far as us not having, and I talk about as far as the enslaved folks that came to America, we couldn't trust the outside folks. We couldn't even necessarily trust our folks because we spoke different languages. Because the folks from the Ivory Coast were mixed up with the folks from Tanzania, and mixed up from the folks, I'm trying to think of the whole West Coast there, but that whole coast, and then going a little bit deeper later on, from the folks from Nigeria when they went deeper. Like that whole West Coast, everybody's mixed up, literally thousands of languages. So we couldn't just not trust the people that obviously took us here, and a third of us died, but then not establishing or being able to establish trust with the people that maybe have as much melanin as we do. And so because of the language barrier, and other issues. So because of that, we really had to rely on ourselves. And so we don't know how to open up and actually be vulnerable in that way. When we are vulnerable, then, our partner gets killed, or our kids are taken away, or we end up being experimented on. Like that goes, 4 centuries of that. So I think and I hope I gave that impression in the piece. I think it's naive to think, okay, suddenly there's 1 million African-American therapists, and then we're all going to go to therapy. It's like, no, that's not what I'm saying. That's part of the problem, but we're fixing 4 centuries of damage, right?
No, exactly, and I mentioned that in that piece I wrote, The Gaslighting of Black People. I actually touched on the Tuskegee experiment in that. So when you say we've either been experimented on, I actually touched on that. And another thing I touched on, it's just like, okay, in light of everything that's happened, now that non-Black people or non-people of color are ready to listen, it doesn't mean we're ready to speak. It's not that simple. And I do believe that's how I worded it. Just because you're ready to listen doesn't mean we're ready to speak, because it means for some people having to relive, re-experience, reopen some wounds that they're just like, listen, I can't do that right now. So I absolutely, and some of it, again, to your point of what you were saying, that some of your friends now in their 40s are going to therapy, coming from a West Indian background, a lot of, and when you're saying that, no, you're not going to be locked up if you go and see a therapist. A lot of the times, and I don't know if maybe you can speak to some of your Jamaican friends and they can confirm this, you start anything and the way that they would talk about that, you're just going to be thinking, listen, if I say anything to anybody, they're going to lock me up, because the stigma attached to that, because like, for example, they, growing up, there was and I've said this on a previous podcast, there was a mental health facility not far from where I grew up, and it was called Shenley. So you started to do anything and it'd be like, I'm going to take you to Shenley and leave you there. You see what I mean? So
I do.
Right. Yeah. So therefore, or where, and there, I can't remember. I think there's a place in Jamaica called Bellevue. And so that's what you'd be threatened with Bellevue.
Yeah, Bellevue's up in New York, actually. But I don't know if there's more than one Bellevue, but Bellevue's a famous hospital up in the New York area.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think there is somewhere where there's a mental institution called Bellevue. So
I think it's the same one. Yeah,
right.
yeah,
So
yeah. Right outside of New York City, I think.
You'd be threatened with being taken there. So therefore,
Yeah.
that's what you learn to say nothing, because listen, I'm not going to Bellevue. I'm not going to Shenley. I'm just not going to any of these places. So I think that's what, for some of them, where that came from, that if I go and see one, they're going to lock me up.
Yeah, I mean, and if you want to go really far back with that, how is that different from, you know, the dynamic of being enslaved and then having a master and then doing something and then someone else telling the master about it to get a one-uppance. So, I mean, you have this whole dynamic here as far as telling on each other, and the whole idea as far as snitching, which goes back to the streets now. Like, all this is so amazing and intertwined, and I think that would be similar to what you're saying. That would be my message to people, even people of color who are not Black. Like, yeah, my friends and I have been laughing because our phones are like ringing off the hook. You know, we're getting emails and it's like, you know, it's like, well, how are you doing? And let's talk about it. And we're like, we've been talking about it for decades. You know what I mean? So I don't know what you're talking about. You know, and it's just like, and that would be my message, right? And that would be my message to other POCs who aren't Black or don't identify as Black, and our white allies, where it's just like, okay, that this isn't, again, 400 years of this isn't going to be fixed in 2 months of protests and some conversations. So you might as well just buckle in and get ready for that marathon.
Yeah.
I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, a white ally, for lack of a better term, and they were like, well, how long do you feel like they should march? Because I haven't marched yet. So it was like, how long do you feel like they should march? And I was like, well, I mean, the Montgomery bus boycott, I just learned, lasted 1.5 years. We just hit 2 months. So,
and everybody's already tired and want to move on to the next thing, right?
Right. I'm like, well, no.
Yeah.
Again, you might as well buckle up. This is a marathon, not a sprint, to use one of my favorite analogies. Like, so you might as well just relax, and we're not going to unknot, you know, systematic oppression in 8 weeks. And it's uncomfortable. Good. It's supposed to be uncomfortable.
Exactly.
Because I've had a lot of conversations with folks where it's like, how can we make this more comfortable? And I'm like,
you can't.
and I don't want it to be. Again, like, you know, the corporate world, you know the business side. I'm sure you've done your share of mentoring and maybe even coaching. I know for myself as a coach, I'm all like, sometimes you're supposed to be uncomfortable and you're supposed to be there, because when you're uncomfortable, that's often when you're most willing to change. So if we're going to change this system of systematic oppression and police brutality and this long laundry list of things, we're going to have to be uncomfortable for a little while. Exactly. I'm okay with that, but I think it's different. And I think this might be what you're getting at, is that as people of African descent or as Black people, we've been uncomfortable for a while. So now it's the turn of other people to be uncomfortable with us. And from our universal uncomfortableness, maybe we can come up with some solutions.
Bring some kind of change.
Right, some type of resolution, but it's going to be uncomfortable. Yeah,
it is.
That's how it works.
Yeah, it's something that you said, and it reminded me of an interview I watched with Denzel Washington, where you were saying about the pressures and the systems were set up to fail and so on. And I hope I do this justice, what he said. They were asking him, has he experienced racism and things like that? And the last part of the interview that I heard is Denzel Washington saying, is the system rigged? Absolutely. But it doesn't mean we're supposed to help it. So going back to your point about, how it works, because you have a father and a stepfather and men not being in the homes and so on. And when he said that, and I thought to myself, if Denzel Washington doesn't do another body of work, nothing else, and you said everything right there. Is the system rigged? Absolutely. But it doesn't mean we should help it.
Yep. And silence, comfortability, if that's even a word, like those things are helping the system move along. And I think that's what I'm trying to share, with people who want to be allies in this, where it's just like, okay, you being comfortable, that's not the mission. And why are you uncomfortable? you start to notice privilege around you, and in the piece and some of the other pieces I've written, I acknowledge my own privilege. I'm a African-American Black man from New Jersey that made it to age 40 something. Like, that's privilege.
Mm-hmm.
I have a nice house and beautiful wife who's, professional, and two great kids that I don't have to worry about feeding them. They're going to eat. If anything, I need to keep food away from them. But that's like, as they say in the Bay Area, that's hella privilege. Like, that's a ridiculous amount of privilege, particularly as a Black man. And so if I'm a Black man and I'm literally being hunted in the streets right now, and I'm a Black man and I'm recognizing my privilege, then other POCs who are not Black, and definitely white allies, they need to recognize their privilege, because I'm even getting uncomfortable. And I'm a wanted man out there. And it's like, if I'm uncomfortable, you sure should be uncomfortable. So if I'm doing this work, then you need to do your work at it. And I think that's where, again, the phone calls and the texts and all that from a lot of people I haven't heard from literally in a while. And I'm like, and I'm talking to my other African-American friends about it, and they're like, yeah, I'm getting a lot of emails where people want to talk. And I'm like, I don't want to talk right now. Which is why, one part of the reason why I started writing the piece for Fatherly. And I have a piece that just ran in Gen magazine, which is part of Medium. And that one is about me having a level of survivor's guilt because I'm not out there with the protesters. But then my wife's a pediatrician, so she's on the front line. We have 2 young kids, and I'm not a spring chicken. And so it's like, it's that thing where it's like, okay, well, because there's still a pandemic happening.
Yeah.
So I forget that. Like, there's 2 pandemics happening. It's like, don't forget about the other one. And so it's like, it doesn't make any sense for me to go out there. But because I do TED Talks, because I've connected with folks like yourself who have a platform, because I'm writing books, because I've been talking about this stuff for years, in and out, because I'm a business coach, I have the ability to make an impact on a different scale than actually going out there with the marchers. And John Lewis passing a week ago kind of, I published an essay right around the time he passed. And it was perfect timing, where it's like, that's what he's talking about with Good Trouble. But I'm going through this process and I'm writing about this stuff because I see so many people who are feeling similar to me, but can't articulate it, which is okay. Like, articulating things is part of my job. So it's like, I own that. I have that privilege, right? But then the second part is I see so many people who want to be allies, but they're confused.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, let me just do this mass message. You know what I mean? And it's like, I'm uncomfortable too. So if I'm uncomfortable, you darn sure should be uncomfortable. This is not, you're right. I'm not uncomfortable because people are getting killed, which is awful. It's a whole nother level of uncomfortability where it's like, I got to deal with my own privilege. You know what I mean?
And with that, I want to, because you've mentioned your coaching and your books, and I want to touch on Damon Brown, the businessman, the entrepreneur, the writer. So talk to me about what got you even started in that arena, in that field.
Wow. I've been a writer forever. So I learned to read when I was like 3, and then started writing around the same time. Yeah, like it was early. But I was one of those people where it's just always knew, kind of like we were talking about earlier, except it came from an inner place, not from an outer place. So I knew I wanted to be a writer. So lifelong writer, got into journalism when I was in high school, started doing my first paid work when I was like 16. Undergrad in journalism, or bachelor's in journalism, master's in magazine publishing from Northwestern. Wrapped all that up when I was around 22. So I was done like early. I was like, I love school anyway, but I was like, I'm out. And then from that point until now, I've been a freelance writer for Playboy, the New York Post, a lot of those guys. And we can get into more granular detail of that. But from a broad standpoint, lived in Silicon Valley for a little while. And then I saw all these startups that were doing interesting things, cover them for the New York Post. I was their Sunday business writer on the West Coast, all those things. Proposed, got married, settled down in San Diego. At the exact same time, I came up with the idea for my first startup, an app called So Quotable, which allowed you to capture people's quotes. So if you and I are having a great conversation, I could say, Alison said this, capture it, and then share it on social media.
Okay.
There's more detail to it, but you get the location and all that. This is back in 2013, 2014. So that was kind of the time. TED wanted me to do a TED Talk related to it. So I did my TED Talk right when the app came out. A friend of a friend heard about the TED Talk and my launch, and the app had a little bit of a cult following. And they were working on an app called Cuddlr, and that connected people for hugs. So this is 2014. So we have Grindr, we have Tinder, we have all these apps that are like hookup apps that we call them. We wanted to do a platonic version of that. So people meeting for hugs and cuddles, Cuddlr. My son had just turned 1. So I'm doing, as I mentioned, I was doing all this entrepreneurship from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. every morning and spending a day with my kid. And so ended up launching it, had a big splash. I think we had 100,000 users in the first week, got the #1 app in several countries, got on the cover of the Wall Street Journal, New York Times. They said we were creating a cuddle economy because there was this whole thing as far as being platonic, but still having physical touch. Mm-hmm. Amazing stuff. And then about a year after we launched it, we ended up selling it shortly after my son's 2nd birthday. And so from that experience, I was like, wait, you don't have to sacrifice everything to make an entrepreneurial mark. Like I was still there for my kid. As I said in a recent keynote, my entrepreneurial journey at that time went from when he was 4 months old to when he was 2 years old. And if I had my eyes on the business and that was it, then suddenly I would have missed the first 2 years of his life, mm-hmm. which still to this day scares the mess out of me because I see people do that.
Yeah, and not just that.
You know what I mean?
If you're focused on it, in some cases it goes from you focus on the business and then next thing you know, your child is graduating college and you think, hold on, what? Wait, huh? Because I've
seen that. I've seen that. My heart's been broken for other people. And you know, I'm an older parent. Like I said, I'm in my 40s. So I think I consider it a blessing where I'm like, I had, you know, enough wisdom to be 30 something and become a parent for the first time. I'm like, oh, wait. As opposed to, you know, having kids when I was a lot younger. And even though I think I was a smart kid, I don't think I necessarily had that wisdom and wasn't as grounded as much. That's why a lot of people that I coach are older, because it's just like, you know, there's a certain level of wisdom, and people, particularly here in America, they worry about things being too late. We are obsessed with youth. And it's just like, no, like I hit it big in my late 30s, early 40s. Like I'm just starting. Like that's not how it works anymore. But anyway, I ended up connecting with Inc. magazine. They were looking for a columnist, and they wanted me to do a column about who I call non-traditional entrepreneurs. So they're like side hustlers, they're solopreneurs, so people like myself who don't fit what they call in Silicon Valley, the pattern matching. So if you put me, Elon Musk, Richard Branson, the late Steve Jobs, and, you know, I don't know, the founder of Snapchat, I'm forgetting his name, Spiegel in a room, and you say which one is not like the other, I'm going to be sticking out. And so the idea that we don't have to look like or act like the so-called, you know, big dogs or whatever, to make an impact as an entrepreneur. We can be ourselves. And so that led to the column. The column got popular. I ended up doing a book related to the column called The Bite-Sized Entrepreneur. That became a bestseller. And I self-published it because the publishers didn't understand what I was trying to do. That became a series that got me on the keynote circuit and doing keynotes related to that. People started asking, so I started doing coaching. And suddenly coaching became a big part of what I do. And it's basically taking the ideas from the books and giving them specific advice and guidance for that. And at this point, between the organizations I've worked with and my solo practice, coached hundreds of people and then have probably connected with thousands, you know, which has been really awesome because it's not even from a pride standpoint, but more from a, the moment is now. You know, people are realizing that they can't wait for which my last book called Bring Your Worth, I talk about that, where you can't wait for permission. You know, if I was waiting for someone to come, I see you smiling, like, you know the deal. Like if I was waiting for Jeff Bezos or even Oprah, you know, respect to her, or Oprah or modern day Beyonce or whatever, to say, Damon, your book is great. And I was waiting for that to publish my book, then it would never have been published. I wouldn't have had, you know, a bestseller, and I wouldn't have the career I have now. So that's the makeup of the work that I do. So I have my column with Inc. Magazine, still 5 years. That's IncDamonBrown.com. I have a community that I talk with once a week through my newsletter. That's at joindamon.me. And then I have my coaching practice and doing keynotes now virtually because of COVID. And that's at damonbrown.net. And so that's the energy I'm trying to bring, is to, I've done 3 TED Talks. I've sold my company. I was able to build my business, without sacrificing my family. Like, there's a lot of luck, but there's also some toolboxes that I got along the way and access that I have that literally most people don't have. And my thing is to do the Prometheus move and to steal the fire and then give it to the rest of everybody else. Like, that's my main goal. Like, that's the bottom line. And so if it doesn't go to that purpose, then I don't do that. If I'm writing a book and it's not going that direction, then there's books that I wanted to do, because I self-publish now. There's books that I wanted to do that I just stopped. I'm like, nah, this isn't it. Same thing with the coaching, where everyone that I coach and everyone on my coaching roster, they're people who have been underserved or underestimated or overlooked or underfunded. They haven't had a seat at the table. And my thing is to equip them with as much stuff as possible. I want to see a bunch of me's out there. That's what I want. I shouldn't be the only one in the Wall Street Journal. Like, I shouldn't be the one that had #1 app. I shouldn't be the one with bestsellers. Like, everyone who is of these communities who haven't been served, they need that. And even with like the article that we connected on, as far as Black men getting therapy, like that's part of that. That's part of the whole mission. Because if we don't have ourselves straight, then how can we expect success? But for me, it's all the same battlefield.
No, that is interesting. So, and I like the fact that you touched on, we're obsessed with age and we feel like we're too late, or we feel like we've missed it, or all those other things because so many people, and that's one of the things that I always like to talk about on any podcast. I like to talk about a person's journey, because there's so many people that have tried something, it didn't work, so they gave up. Or other people, they really want to do something, but because, again, they think they're too old or they've missed it, they don't even start to try.
That's right.
And so what encouragement would you give to people that fall into those categories?
Yeah, I think there's I think very astute of you, because I found there are 2 different categories. There are the folks who feel like it's too late, or there are the folks that absolutely want to do it, but they feel like they don't have the resources. And I realized there's kind of 2 subsets going on there. For the first subset, you really have to stretch your timeline. And this is the biggest issue I see with the people that I coach, is that they're like, I want to have a bestseller. Let's just say that. I want to have a bestseller book. Cool. Great. So did you start writing yet? Well, I haven't quite gotten to it, but I want to make sure that I have a bestseller by the time I turn 50, which I've heard before. Lots of issues with that, but let's just run with it. So it's like,
there's nothing to bestsell.
Exactly right. That's right. Lots of people are trying to do a best-selling book, but you're going to do it. Okay, got it. And you're going to do it by this time. But all that aside, the challenge ends up being not that they can't do it. It's just that they want to do it on their ideal timeline. As I shared recently, my first app, So Quotable, again, when I was waking up at 3 a.m., 3:15, it took me 5 months to launch it. If my similarly yoked, as they say, colleagues had worked on it and they didn't have a family, they could have did it in 5 weeks. I knew that fact. I knew that. I was like, I know this is taking me 10 times as long. Like, I knew it. And I accepted that because my main focus was on my family, my son. That was it. I wasn't going to get that time back. So it's like, okay, well, this is a sacrifice to do that. We'll stretch the timeline. And I did it. And then a TED Talk came out of it. And, we wouldn't be talking now. Like, so much stuff came out of that journey. But so many folks are like, well, it has to be this particular way. You know, and you mentioned you're a minister, you understand that. I think about it from a universe standpoint because I'm a Buddhist, so I look at it from a different standpoint. But it's the same argument where it's like you're busy crying about the door that closed, but there's a window over here. It's like the universe actually has something better for you, but you're so focused on the spilled milk over here. Forgive all my analogies, but you understand what I'm trying to say.
Big analogy person. So.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, forgive the listeners, and I'm sorry. But you understand what I'm saying? Like, you're so worried about what was so-called lost. Mm-hmm. You're worried that, again, back to the proverbial thing, you know, you're worried that you're not going to have a bestseller by 50, that you're not going to accept that you're going to have 3 bestsellers by the time you're 52. Like, you're so worried about that. Mm-hmm. And that narrows your scope. It makes you myopic. It makes you not seeing opportunities. It makes you brittle, inflexible. I could keep going. Like, there's so many problems with that mentality. A lot of coaching that I do is helping people remove those roadblocks, right? So that's the first group, as far as saying I can't do it, but it's because they don't realize that they have a certain ideal environment that's going to help them move forward. Mm-hmm. That's never going to happen. Just like there's never an ideal time to have kids, ever. There's never an ideal time to get married. It's always hard. You know what I mean? Like, you know, and I love being married. It's hard. Like, there's never an ideal time. So those aspects. For the second group that you're talking about, the latter, where they know what they want to do, they just feel like they don't have the resources for it. They really need to figure out where their resources are. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually talking a lot with folks about this, where someone might not have money, let's say a college student. They might not have a whole lot of money, but they have a mess load of time. Mm-hmm. Right? Right now, my money's straight, but, you know, I got 2 kids. You know, I have a partner that I would like to stay married to. So that's some of that energy. And of course, I have my friends and I have a mortgage and all this stuff. Like, I have this very full life. But my money's straight, so I can invest in myself. I can take coaching classes and so forth. I can invest in my business in a way that a college student couldn't. Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of figuring out what resources are actually plentiful for you and then running with that. And that's been a discussion I've had with my coach clients for a while. Because mm-hmm. folks are like, there was one person I ran into where they said they wanted to start their business, but they needed money. And I said, well, why do you need money? Well, I need money to start this thing up. Well, why do you need money though? What are you going to use the money for? Like, for a vacation? What do you use the money for? And they said, well, I need a web designer. And I was like, okay, so you don't need money. You need a web designer. Mm-hmm. And this poor person, like, I brought this up like 15 times over the course of a couple of years, but it's this beautiful symbolism where we put weight on those things we don't have. Mm-hmm. And if you need a web designer, then you can barter for it. You can give them a piece of the company that you're going to start. You can go on Fiverr and get a really, really cheap web designer. You can learn HTML and do it yourself. Like, I can keep going. That could be a whole podcast.
Yeah. No, honestly, because
right? We'll talk.
I fell into that. Well, I don't know if I fell into that. I'm one of these people that I'd like to think I'm quite resourceful, so I'm going to figure it out. And so I needed a web designer, and it's just like, and I found one, like you said, on Fiverr. So I didn't need these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and I needed a logo. Found one on Fiverr. So
especially a logo, yeah, you got that.
There's so many different things that if you actually really think about it, and I think you know what, as you're saying that, what's just come to my mind is because people are so focused on they need to get it all done now, that's why they need money. Because I need a web designer and I need logos and I need this, I need these, and I need all these things and I need it now. So in order to get it done now, it's going to cost me all this money. So I need money. Whereas it was a case of, for me, I did my logo. 1 month I got paid. I did my logos. Another month I did something else. And yeah, granted, it may have taken me much longer than it would have taken if I had the money to get it all done now. But it's a case of, like you say, let's be realistic. Let's strip it back down and let's do what we can with what we have.
There it is.
I think people are completely missing that because it's, I need this to do it. Actually, but do you really though?
My favorite question. Do we really though? Well said. Exactly. Do you really though? And that as sarcastic as that question is, like that cuts right to the heart of it, where it's just like, you don't. And as I say in, I talk about that in the Ultimate Bite-Sized Entrepreneur, I got more done. This came out a few years ago. Mm-hmm. So this, not even counting now, I got more done in that first 2 years of me being a stay-at-home dad, a father, a caretaker, the primary caretaker, than I did in the previous decade plus of my career. And I did 18 books before I became a father. Like, I was writing again for Playboy and New York Post, a lot of the major folks. Like, I was busy. After I became a father, it's like, in that 2-year period of time, it was 2 TED Talks. I wrote a book. I started my Inc. column. I started 2 companies, sold one, like within 2 years. But that's because I was efficient with, ended up being 15 hours a week. I was efficient for those 15 hours a week from 3:15 to 6 a.m. I was like a machine because I was, as I say in the book, I was trimming all the fat. But I did that because I didn't have the resources to waste. I had to have those limitations. Now, I'm not recommending you have kids just to, to limit your time. But there's ways that you can do that. That's why I talk about my coaching. There's ways you can do that, where it's just, there's ways you can narrow it down and be like, I'm going to focus on this today and get this much progress. Like, I love what you just said as far as, you got your paycheck or you got your money and you got a logo done. You're not starving, you're not losing your house or whatever, and your logo got done. That comes, again, from stretching the timeline and from patience. And amazingly, this all goes back to the marching that's going on. It all goes back to the therapy, where we're not going to fix things overnight. Mm-hmm. And as soon as we get into that fix things overnight mentality, then things get sloppy. It reminds me a lot of I had my teenage years in Michigan, not too far from Detroit. And for decades, probably since I was a kid, we've had awful roads back there, and it's like huge craters and stuff. But that's because of the weather, because the weather is really inclement, as they say. So a lot of snow gets in there and then expands to ice, and then it ends up breaking up anyway, that's a Midwest thing. Anyway, for years, the leadership there, like the governor and the people and the mayors and all that stuff, wouldn't stop business for 2 weeks or a month to fix everything. Instead, they would just, put little things in the crack, little Band-Aid.
Yeah.
And then now suddenly you have, 30, 40 years of damage. And finally it's like, okay, now we need to wait for 2 months. Actually, it sounds similar to COVID. But, now we have to wait for 2 months and not have any activity. And people are upset. It's like, well, if you dealt with it, then it would be done. Mm-hmm. It's the same type of thing as far as stretching the timeline and saying, we're going to deal with this at our own pace. This is going to be a marathon. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I knew I was going to be in the long haul. Again, I was in Silicon Valley, so in the same rooms as Steve Jobs. And I've had people that are close to me that became millionaires based on startups they had. And literally the day before, we're having ramen noodles and splitting something at dinner. The next day, their company got bought for millions of dollars. I'm not exaggerating. So I saw that. Mm-hmm. And I saw people go the other way. And I was like, I'm not. Seriously, I'm in the long haul. I'm too old for this. I'm not doing all that. Mm-hmm. That's crazy. And even if things go bust, as far as with my business, I still got my family. I still have my friends. I still have my health. Mm-hmm. So I even get into that. All those different details. And if you take your time with your journey, then how do you want to be around? That's the question. Again, Jay-Z has been on my mind because I just saw a clip of him right before our conversation. But he was talking about that, where he's like, he's been in the business for 25 years and it's a young man's game. But that's because he's diversified and played the long game. Mm-hmm. And there are people that were competitors of his at that time.
Where are they now?
Let's say you were in the clubs. I'm a big hip hop guy. Like, these people for like in 96, 97. We might know them, but it's like, oh yeah, I remember so-and-so. That was in 98. Where are they now?
Right.
I wasn't going to be that guy. Mm-hmm. That's why I identified. I wasn't going to be that guy. And that's why, I think that's part of the reason why, we ended up selling Cuddlr in 2015. And there's still amazing things that are coming from that process, from that experience, and amazing people that I'm starting to help in 2020. That's on purpose. It wasn't like I'm going to be the guy that's known for that app that came out in 2014, 2015. If I mention the app, it's part of my story. But now I don't even have to mention the app. I can just tell people what I do now. And that comes from stretching the timeline and being like, I want longevity versus, trying to get out as soon as possible. I hope all that makes sense.
It makes absolute sense. And my brain, while you're talking, is going a mile a minute. It's like, okay, what can I apply? What can I okay, how can I do this? Okay, let me just put some things into place. And absolutely, it makes absolute sense. Damon, thank you. So what's next for Damon?
Wow. There's always something next. Yeah. So I'm doing a lot of virtual keynotes, which is great. I'm actually keynoting the Bedroom Candy V conference. So Candy Burris, she actually has a history of the group Escape. And so major hip hop group. I don't know about in the UK, but over here they were a big deal.
Hello, Escape. Yes, I have.
Okay.
Of them, I learned the entire words to this song. Who Can I Run To?
Oh, it's a beautiful song.
Right, 90s. Come on, from that era, 90s R&B.
Yes, ma'am.
Slow jams and so. Oh yes. I've got their music. Yeah.
Okay, there you go. And so, so she was singer-songwriter back then. She wrote a lot of the songs, which is why I appreciate her work ethic. And again, I love culture, but I care more about the business of the culture. So not just we're creating, but how are we getting paid and how are we creating generational wealth, as they say nowadays. So the bigger picture of that. You can create as much as you want, but that's why I self-published. I was doing traditional publishing for a long time, and I was like, wait, hold on. Like, I know where my audience is. I know how to produce the books. I have a circle of people who will take care of the cover and all that. Anyway, she has a similar ethic. And about 7 years ago, she launched something called Bedroom Candy, which is basically you're able to sell her intimacy toys and do that as a consultant. So if you're familiar with like Mary Kay, Tupperware back in the day, back when I was growing up, that vibe, but for grown people. I like that kind of thing. For grown folks, exactly, as they say, for grown folks. Doing it for 7 years, it's been blowing up. And they asked me to keynote. So they have their annual conference. So I've been working on that, working with them. I'm super excited about it. I've written a few books about sexuality. So that vibe, as well as being able to support a community that's full of side hustlers. Because a lot of the folks that are working with Bedroom Candy have a day job. And so it's the same thing we're talking about as far as stretching the timeline, getting those details together, knowing what your main thing is, and make sure your priorities are protected. So the focus is on that. Actually have some stuff in the pipeline that I can't talk about quite yet. You'll be one of the first people to know, though. Yes, right? So I always got something in the works. Someone just texted me. They're like, I know you're working on something. What are you working on? And I'm like, I can't talk to you yet. Like, it's still in the lab. So working on some good stuff. Probably by the end of the year, it'll be out. Okay. And then if people want to learn more about it, they can go to joindamon.me. So that's my weekly newsletter. Okay. It's like extra access. And so it's a discussion similar to what we're talking about now, except in a bite-sized form. Okay. And access to the books early, access to I have an online boot camp for side hustlers. You can learn about that through joindamon.me. And that's the main thing. And of course, trying to make sure that I'm spiritually and mentally healthy.
That is so, especially,
isn't it though?
Yes, so important. And I'm so grateful that you are doing that for yourself, because it is just so needed. And not just now, it's just needed in general. So you said that people can find you on joindamon.me.
Yep, that's my weekly newsletter. So it comes out every Wednesday at 5:55 a.m., no fail. And so it's just a little nugget. It's like 200 words. It's really short, but it's a vignette, as we call it in the journalism world. It's a vignette talking about the stuff we're talking about now, just little piece of something. And then it gives the latest stuff that I'm reading, as well as access to my ink column. My ink column is also at inkdamonbrown.com. So I have a regular column within. I've been doing it for 5 years. There's probably 500 columns up there. And so again, the stuff we're talking about here, I get into that there with a business flavor to it. And if they want to learn more about me, catch my keynotes and so forth, then go to damonbrown.net. And again, I'm about giving it. So any TED Talks that I've done, almost any keynote that I've done, it's available on there. And I think that's the major stuff. I do a bit of social media. So if you want to follow me on social media, it's Brown Damon. And so that's on Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn. And then I'm pretty active on Instagram, particularly with sharing other people's knowledge. And it's all the same flavor, but I love giving other people shine. And because I think we're all kind of going that same direction as far as uplifting the side hustlers, the solopreneurs, the people that can really make an impact. Yeah.
Great stuff. Thank you, Damon. It has been such a pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Alison. Thank you for letting me on. I appreciate connecting with the audience.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Damon. And I will definitely be in touch soon because I'm interested to learn. I definitely want to be a guest, not a guest, but a part of the next time you're speaking. I definitely am going to sign up, register, whatever I need to do. So
I appreciate that.
I want to be a part of that to hear, and because I just think that there's so much wisdom and so much knowledge that we can't just squash it into a session, and we have to keep learning. We have to keep evolving because I got a quote in one of my books. You have to keep moving because because if you think about it, a flat line is death.
Yeah.
So we have to keep moving. Because if we don't move, that's it. That's it. We will dry up, and I don't mean literally die, but we will if we don't keep moving, keep learning, keep absorbing. We'll just waste away. So I'm definitely want to be there, front and center. As front and center as you can be on Zoom, right?
You could see everyone's gonna be front and center. It's beautiful. You're gonna front row seat.
Or anything like that, because listen, I'm right there. I can count the beads of sweat.
Exactly, totally.
So I definitely I would encourage everybody listening, sign up because the information is gold. It's really gold. So please
Thank you.
Sign up. Where it is DamonBrown.net if you want information just right across the board, and you can be directed to all the various places from.
That's right. If you want to start there, that's a good place to start. You can access my newsletter from there. You can catch all my TED Talks and keynotes. You can contact me if you want to get some coaching or go ahead and get some signed versions of my books. Again, I run my own business. So, if you want the books, you can come to me, or go to Amazon, but I'm here, which is always a little bit more exciting to be able to connect with the person that's creating it. At least it is for me. That's my headquarters. And thanks for having me on your platform. And I'm excited to reach some new people and give some insight. Yeah.
Yes, that's great. Thank you, Damon. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.